Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the latest version of Every 20 Years Florida Constitution Revision Commission. This is our third or fourth generation, actually, updated presentation that you can use to educate the public about this really important process. My name is Annette Boyd-Pitts, and I've worked in partnership with the courts here in Florida and the Florida Bar statewide to educate the public about our legal system, the Constitution, a variety of topics through primarily our benchmarks program. Been doing this for about 3 decades and happy to have you join us today. The presentation on the Florida Constitution Revision Commission is one of several benchmarks presentations. And benchmarks is an adult civics education program that's sponsored as a part of the Constitutional Judiciary Committee. I want to just kind of take you through the benchmarks program, and then we'll jump right into the brand new presentation on Florida Constitution Revision Commission. So benchmarks is a series of activities. We've designed these activities primarily for adult, nonpartisan audiences. And they're designed really to be used by attorneys and judges to educate the public about the courts and the Constitution. Each of the activities ranges from about 30 to 60 minutes. Generally, we try to keep it to about 45 minutes. The presentation materials include warm-up activities, handouts, presentation guides, and most of the activities include a PowerPoint. They're all very engaging activities meant to really kind of draw the audience members into your presentation rather than having you stand behind a podium and lecture. So presenters can actually receive CLE credit, ethics credit, for presentations made up to 3 credits per reporting period, and you'll also receive credit for this training. So let's start with, what does the public know? If you're going to be presenting to the public, what is it that the public knows about our government, about our Constitution? There have been a variety of different national surveys conducted. One of the most recent is by the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania. And they've really found that only about 26% of Americans can name all 3 branches of government, of our U.S. government, and 31% couldn't name a single branch of government. So I think that's something really important to keep in mind as you make these presentations. From a different survey back in 2014, we found that just over a quarter of Americans, about 27%, knew that it takes a 2/3 vote of the House and Senate to override a presidential veto, and 1 in 5 Americans incorrectly thinks that a 5-4 Supreme Court decision is sent back to Congress for reconsideration. So that's what we're starting with. That doesn't mean that every audience that you'll be exposed to will come in with that knowledge level, but just keep that in mind. So the benchmarks lessons that we have available through the Florida Bar are organized into 3 categories: the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, courts and the judicial branch, and special topics. And again, everything is housed on the Florida Bar website and available and accessible for you to print out and bring with you to these presentations. This gives you a snapshot look at some of the materials that are available when you go to the Florida Bar's website to download these presentations. You'll receive an overview of each activity. And on your screen, you can see that there's a Q column on the right-hand side telling you everything from how much time to spend on this part of the activity to when to pass out a handout and so forth. So there's really no way that you can do this incorrectly, because we've given you so much direction in terms of the entire presentation, how long it will take you to do it, what are your objectives. And so in addition to this overview, you'll also receive, generally for most of these, a PowerPoint presentation, all of the handouts that you need. Again, just sort of a one-stop shop. The variety of presentations are really unique. So we have presentations on the role of juries in our system, on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We have case studies on state courts and federal courts. We have special topics. And again, everything's very interactive. You may have seen us at some point present this activity called Could You Pass the Test? And these are really just questions from the U.S. naturalization exam that you can use as an icebreaker or warm-up to sort of introduce the public to some pretty general questions that we hope they know, but generally find that they do not. Lots of presentations on judges and the judicial system, how to judge judicial candidates. And then, of course, we also have, as a part of benchmarks, the Informed Voters Fair Judges Project materials through the National Association of Women Judges. All of these materials can be found on the Florida Bar's website, and to access those, again, everything you need, the toolkit, the PowerPoint presentations, the overview, all the handouts, everything you need is there. And what I tell people generally is to go through and look at these and find the ones that you're most interested in utilizing with the public, and then put your PowerPoint presentation on a flash drive to take with you, and then print out everything else. Again, if you go to the Florida Bar's website, you can see from this slide how to access it through the public, a link here on the website, and then under Legal Civics Education. That's how you're going to find all of these materials. So before we actually introduce you to this latest version, this fourth generation version of the Florida Constitution Revision Commission, just want to emphasize that whenever you do a benchmarks presentation, some really just good advice for you to remember. First is to choose nonpartisan organizations and audiences to whom you're going to present this information to. So present with a nonpartisan approach. So you shouldn't come in with a specific idea or ideology. We want you to, again, be very neutral in your presentations, and again, present with a very much a nonpartisan approach. Your goal is to teach participants or the audience how to consider an issue, not what to think. So how to think, not what to think. We want you to follow the outline, but we don't want you to be tied to it to the extent that if your audience takes you in a different direction on a particular slide, we want you to be able to be flexible. So use it as an outline, but be flexible. And we really want you to be very, very careful in terms of using labeling to not politicize the presentation, and particularly the courts. So those are just a few sample tips. And we have a toolbox, a toolkit online that will help you in preparing more thoroughly for each of these presentations. So today, what we want to do is take you again through the presentation that we'll have available for you online. This is, again, our fourth generation version of this material. So it is updated, and if you have a previous version, we would ask that you, can certainly go back and look at it, but try to use this one in your public presentations. The very first thing you do when we present this presentation, and this has remained in every version that we've conducted and presented, is that we start with a warm-up. So as people arrive and you're getting set up, you're putting your flash drive in the computer and you're testing the presentation materials, you're going to hand out this document as your handout that you'll print in advance, and you'll give to participants as they arrive to your presentation. And you can just ask them to fill it out. And it's really just a question and answer, yes or no. Do you think it's in the Florida Constitution? And so you'll have these either set up already on the tables as people arrive, or you can hand it to them, introduce yourself, and just have a way of connecting with the public when they walk into the room. So some of the questions on this little handout will be whether or not they think that our state constitution contains some of these provisions. And some of the provisions may be the powers of the branches of government, the English as an official state language, pregnant pigs, the definition of marriage, how judges are selected. All of these topics will just be on a little handout, and they'll say yes or no, we think it is or it isn't in the state constitution. And then you'll debrief that, and it'll really be a way to get the audience focused on what you're going to be talking about today. And by the way, we have an answer key for the presenters as well. So when we start off with the public, we ask them, what is a constitution? And we let the audience engage with you as you ask that question. So some of the responses generally that we get from the audiences, and again, make sure they have an opportunity to answer when you ask that question. It's similar to a rule book for government. It outlines the structure and function of government. It limits the powers of government. And it lists some of our rights and reflects the principles and values of society. So make sure you describe it in such a way that's very practical and concrete so that the audience understands, first of all, that we have a state constitution and that it would really, how it might vary or how it's similar really to our federal constitution. So we start off very generically. What is a constitution? What does it include? Then we're going to take a look at and compare the U.S. Constitution to the Florida Constitution. How we do that is we're going to just kind of highlight certain similarities and differences. So we're going to say that both constitutions set up the structure and function of government, one at the federal level, one at the state level. And they both limit the powers of government, one at the state level, one at the federal level. Both contain Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution is at the back. It's at the end. It's the first 10 amendments. And the Declaration of Rights for the Florida Constitution is actually in the front of the Florida Constitution, so it's Article 1. Both documents outline how to amend these documents, the amendment processes, and the number of those that we can have in each of those documents, and then the fact that it's the highest law in the land at the federal and state levels. So what is the state constitution? So we go from a constitution to comparing the fact that we have a federal and a state constitution to now focusing in on the state constitution. And this is a definition on the Florida legislature's website. So things we want to emphasize here is that it's an organized system of fundamental principles for the government of the state. So we're going to emphasize state. It's of a permanent and general nature, and it originates from the people. So again, we've animated this so that it's circled the things that we want you to highlight. When we put this slide up, we asked the audience to try to highlight for us some, again, of the similarities and differences between what might be in our state constitution versus our federal constitution. And so, again, they're going to say things like, well, the three branches of government, we have the same three branches of government in our federal constitution as our state. We both contain rights and that kind of thing. So what are some differences? They're going to point out things generally like education and local government. So make sure that you highlight those provisions in the state constitution and how they're similar and different from the federal constitution. We're going to go back and emphasize, generally speaking, the branches of government is sort of Civics 101, what each branch does. We're going to kind of try to highlight separation of powers and checks and balances. When you talk about the judicial branch, we generally want to make sure that we're talking about interpreting and applying the law. And then I always try to highlight which article these branches are found in our state constitution. Again, we're always coming back to our state constitution. I like to have this little hierarchy of law chart, which shows people, and I generally will have the audience interact with me and talk about the fact that what's the lowest level of law and how do we get to the U.S. Constitution. So if we were climbing a ladder, where would we put on that bottom rung of the ladder? And city and county ordinances, those are local laws. We might climb up and then we'd have state statutes would be above the local laws, and they're passed by the legislature. State constitutions would be above state statutes, followed by federal statutes, and then the U.S. Constitution is the highest law in the land. Again, we've tried to make it very visual to emphasize certain points. This is a critical one in this presentation, and it's the difference between a constitution and a statute. And so I would just ask the audience, what is the difference between a constitution and a statute? And should one be more general than the other? This is a great conversation starter and a critical element of the presentation. By the way, I should mention that all of these presentations, if you print them in a notes view in your PowerPoint slides and you print them out, then you'll have all the presenter notes when you make these presentations, and you should always review it in advance. So how do we amend the state constitution? Well, let's take a look. We have 27 amendments that have been ratified to the U.S. Constitution, even though more than 11,000 have been proposed. So that's one thing to think about. And compared to the Florida Constitution, where we really have had more than 120 amendments since 1968. So historically, how did we amend our state constitution? Generally through the legislative process or a constitutional convention. Now, those were the historical methods for amending the state constitution. And today we have 5 methods. And of course, this could change. We could always have more or less if those changes were made to the Constitution. So right now we have 5 ways to amend our state constitution. It's highlighted in Article 11. And today we're going to focus on number 2. But let's go over the 5 just so you'll know. We can amend the state constitution by a proposal by the state legislature, through the Constitution Revision Commission every 20 years, through a citizen initiative, Constitutional Convention, and the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission. So who decides? No matter which way it comes on the ballot, the voters will ultimately decide if a proposal is added to the state constitution. It does require 60% of voters to approve the proposal, and that was changed from a simple majority back in 2006. So again, the voters are going to ultimately decide if any proposal is going to be added to the state constitution. Once it's passed by the voters, it is included in the state constitution. All right, so what is this Constitution Revision Commission that you've been hearing about? So every 20 years, the commission is appointed to adopt rules of procedure. They're going to examine the state constitution. They're going to hold these public hearings. And then they're going to file recommended changes to the Florida Constitution for voter consideration in the next general election. And those recommendations will be placed directly on the ballot, so there will be no automatic judicial review. It could be more than one subject matter addressed, perhaps in a particular proposal. So these are things that the public needs to be very aware of and very educated on when they appear on the ballot, so that they make good choices. So we say that this is the third Constitution Revision Commission, and it is as a constitutional body. But the very, very first one actually was back in 1965, when a commission was composed of the numbers that you see there in front of you. This was a legislatively appointed body, and their role was really to submit recommendations to the legislature for revisions to that Florida Constitution for 1968. So 1965, the legislature created this body, and that body was designed so that it could make recommendations to submit to the legislature to really do an entire review of the Constitution. So let's see what that body looked like in 1965. The Attorney General was one of the members. One member was appointed by the Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court, and it had to be a member of the Supreme Court. The Chief Justice also was allowed to appoint 4 additional people, but they could not be justices of the Supreme Court. 10 appointments were provided by the governor, including the chairperson, 8 appointments by the Senate President, 8 appointments by the Speaker of the House, and 5 actually were appointed by the President of the Florida Bar with approval by the Board of Governors. So that's really the original sort of composition of this body that was going to create the changes, the massive changes really, to the Constitution that we now see as the 1968 Constitution. So this is the body that we started out with. And again, it was enacted by law, and you can see the actual document, the actual law there and what it says. And so after that, that body, that 1965 body, they were making these recommendations for changes to the Constitution. And they recommended this composition of the Constitution Revision Commission. And let me show you what they recommended. So that original body recommended that the Florida Constitution Revision Commission would still be consisting of 37 people, but they divided up the appointment processes among the three branches of government a little more in a little more equitable fashion. So their 37 people included the Attorney General, 12 members selected by the governor, 12 members selected by the Chief Justice, and 6 members by the House Speaker and 6 members by the President of the Senate. So it was 12, 12, and 12 amongst the three branches of government. So that was what they recommended to be included in the Constitution. However, that was changed ultimately by the legislature and this liaison committee, and it was really created and revised in a way that we see today is reflected in our state constitution. So this was actually the liaison committee, and they came up with the configuration again that we see today, which is the Attorney General, 15 appointments by the governor, 8 appointments by the Speaker of the House, 9 appointments by the Speaker of the House, 9 by the Senate President, and 3 appointments by the Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court. We have the vote on that. It was 69 to 26. And again, this was proposed by the legislature and approved. So that's what we have today. That's our configuration and how it differed from the original recommendation. I think it's kind of nice just to have this visual here to see the very first sort of legislatively designed committee. What they recommended is in the second column, and in the third column is what the liaison committee revised and recommended and what we see today. Hope that makes sense. That's probably one of the things we get the most questions about is how did we come up with this configuration of appointments? And that's really the history of it. We did a lot of research to document that and pulled all of the archives. So let's take a look quickly at the preceding Constitution Revision Commissions and what happened. So the first one in 1977-78 was actually chaired by Sandy D'Alembert. There were 8 proposals. None of them were adopted. And you can see on your screen the variety of issues that were proposed in that first Constitution Revision Commission. The next one, 20 years later, was chaired by Dexter Douglas. There were 9 proposals on the ballot, and 8 were successful. You can see those, and you can see the percentages of passage there, the passage rates. And today, our Constitution Revision Commission, again, has 37 appointments. They represent about 17 of our 67 counties, a variety of professions, and you can actually read all of their bios either on the bar's website or on the CRC website directly. And in the presentation, we actually designate the commissioners by who appointed them. So people can actually see the individuals, who they are, what communities they come from, and who they were actually appointed by throughout this process, which branch of government. Okay, so now we need to let the public know how they can be involved in this process. And remember, we've kind of gone through, again, several versions of this because we find ourselves on this wheel here at different levels throughout the process. So today we're at a level where we already know who's appointed to the commission, so that is done. We have already gone through the point where the public can submit online proposals for amendments to the Constitution. That's already done. And now the commissioners are presenting their proposals, so there's still an opportunity for you to interact with the commissioners and review all of those proposals online and participate actively in that way. But ultimately, remember that probably the most important thing you can do also is vote and be educated, excuse me, on each of these proposals whenever they make it to the ballot. So this is what the website looks like. This is the Florida Constitution Revision Commission government website. And you can see across your screen there, the, I guess you would call that a garnet toolbar there. And if you were to go, I mean, this website really keeps you very updated on committee meetings that you can attend. You can watch the videos of those meetings. You can also, again, here on this website, find the commissioners and their bios, the committees that the commissioners actually serve on. And then you can actually review the proposals, both public and commissioner proposals. So that's the distinction I want you to make with the audience, is that when they're on this website and they go to the section that says committees and commissioners and proposals, that toolbar, if you were to go to proposals and you click on proposals, you're going to find a section for commissioner proposals and public proposals. So if you wanted to just get a sense of some of the proposals that were made by the public, you can look at that because it is interesting to see those. But the commissioner proposals are the ones right now that are the most important for you to look at, because those are the ones that may ultimately end up on the ballot in some form. So what kinds of things are being talked about? What kinds of issues are important? When we've seen the growth in our state from 1968, when that Constitution was revised, to today and in the future for the next 20 years, what are some of the issues? And have the public talk with you about that. What are some important issues that are possibly going to be on the ballot? So if you were to look at the public proposals on the website, there were 782 submitted online. And there are also others that were submitted by mail. So again, go to that website I was just showing you, look under proposals and look under public, and you'll see some of these issues that were presented by the public. They wrote them, they went online and presented them. Let's take a look at a couple of them. One, right to health care. Another one was school access for children, and that just dealt with transportation outside of designated school areas. So you can see the variety of issues that the public was concerned about and proposed. Now, if you were to switch over to the commissioner proposals, you're going to find about 100. And these are the ones that possibly in some form could end up on the ballot if enough of the commissioners vote for it or feel that it is important. Let's take a look at some of those commissioner proposals right now. The ones we've pulled for you are, again, just a sampling of the 100 proposals that are listed there. First one is the restoration of civil rights of certain convicted felons upon completion of their sentence. The second one is requiring the legislature to provide for the promotion of civic literacy in public education. The next one deals with the prohibition of oil drilling for exploration and extraction of specified coastal waters. There's one that is deleting provisions authorizing the death penalty as a punishment for capital crimes. And then one establishing requirements on employers to verify the employment eligibility of new employees. That's a sampling of some of the 100 proposals that are currently being considered and developed by the Commission. Again, you could go online, read the full proposal, and begin to think through how you might vote on those. So again, we're not telling people how to vote on specific issues. We're just trying to give them the resources to make intelligent, reasoned, effective decisions. So one thing I like to share with them is that you may see some similarities between some of these proposals that are online. And we've given you in this presentation a couple of different options to look at and compare. So we've given you two here. These both deal with the judiciary. Proposal 0001 was proposed by a commissioner to increase the age after which a judge or justice may no longer serve. So this is really the retirement age of judges proposal. Right now it's 70, and they're trying to increase it through this proposal to 75. Now, that's very short and succinct and very specific, right? If you look at proposal 0008, which has recently been withdrawn, you'll see that it also included almost the exact same language to increase the age after which a judge or justice may no longer serve. And so you might just say at face value, well, those are the same, right? That's why it was removed. Well, no, if you look further on proposal 0008, you'll find that in addition to increasing the age requirement, they were trying to change the appointment process to require Senate confirmation of appointment. So it was really a very big change to how we select judges in this state. Again, the proposal on the right has been withdrawn. But it's important, I think, for the public to understand that not to just do a cursory kind of glance at these things, but to really read and evaluate these proposals. And again, this is what it might look like, changing from 70 to 75. And highlighting the points that are specifically in each of these. Now, what we like to do as an interactive component in this presentation is to have the public working in small groups. If you're sitting at tables, that's great. You could have 4 or 5 people in a group. But what we're going to have them do is to work in small groups and select a proposal from the commissioner proposal list. So they're going to all go to this website. They can get to it on their phones. They can go under proposals, and they're going to look for commissioner proposals. Find one that's interesting to the group. They're going to look at the title, the sponsors, what specific language, and review any amendments or analysis of the proposal. They're going to first ask themselves, should this be in a state constitution? Why or why not? And if not, how else could you address this problem? What are the pros and cons of this proposal? And how many issues are addressed in the course of that one proposal? And finally, would you vote yes for the proposal as it's written? Would you vote no? Why? And then would you modify in some way? So again, this is just a way for the public to become comfortable with using this website, as well as identifying some of the topics that are being presented that may eventually end up on the ballot, and to begin to analyze and evaluate how they might vote on some of these issues, these proposals. So that's the most interactive component. But again, you're presenting this in a way where you're having this interaction with the audience. You're walking around with the audience. You're connecting with them. You're not telling them how you would vote on any of these issues. And that's not the important part here at all. We just want people to analyze the proposals, understand their power, really, in that voting process, because ultimately, the voters of the state of Florida will decide which, if any, of these proposals go into the Constitution. Many people would say, be cautious and take great care as we do that. So that is why we're really trying to educate the public and help bar members to present in a way that will facilitate public interaction with this website and public analysis of some of the issues that may be on the ballot. Again, there's nothing more important to this discussion than the fact that the voters will decide if a proposal is added to the Florida Constitution. And remember, it takes 60% of voters to approve the proposal. And once it's passed, then that's the only way it's going to get into the state constitution. Had a lot of people ask me over the years, why do you have pregnant pigs in the state constitution? And I say it's because the voters voted for it. So again, no matter how it gets there, and any of these ways that we can amend the Constitution, it's ultimately up to the voters as to whether or not it will pass and be in the Constitution. I think it's also important to remind people that no matter how many proposals come out of the Florida Constitution Revision Commission, there very well may be others on the ballot as well, other amendments proposed to the state constitution outside of the Constitution Revision Commission. proposals, because others could be proposed by either the legislature or citizens. And those can be viewed through the Department of State Elections website. You can see all of the ones that will be on the ballot there. So these are great resources for the public to have. Give them time to write it down because they will not necessarily have this PowerPoint. You'll be using this to make your presentation. Again, great resources for you to review in advance. I really want the public, I want our bar members to know that if you have questions on the CRC or the process, you know, they have an executive director, they have staff at the Capitol. But this presentation was designed for you to make life easier for you as you present this benchmarks activity on a very timely, important, critical, really, time in our state's history. If you need to contact me, my email address is staff, S-T-A-F-F, at FLREA.org, staff at FLREA.org. And again, you can contact Xana Lyle at the Florida Bar as well. She can put you in touch with me if you'd like to walk through these presentations. And if you have any questions at all, I'd be happy to help you prepare as you do these presentations. So what should you do now? Well, we want you to join the Florida Bar Speakers Bureau for sure. We want you to visit the Florida Bar's Benchmarks website and look for the presentation, specifically special topics called Every 20 Years. The newest version will be posted soon. And after you take this training, you'll be ready to go. You'll be ready to go out and find your own presentations. Don't sit back and wait for the Florida Bar to contact you and say, we want you to present at this forum. We want you to go out into your communities and present this information. So you would go to www.floridabar.org/benchmarks. www.floridabar.org/benchmarks. That's how you're going to find all of these wonderful materials. And I wish you the greatest luck. I think you're going to have fun. You're going to do it once, twice, 3 times. Who knows? Maybe 5 or 10 times. We appreciate your interest and look forward to hearing about your community presentation. Have a good day.